Hello, fellow tea drinkers. Welcome to Oversteeped. Today, we're touching on a controversial topic, but one that's important to understand if you want to be a writer for our modern times. Representation in fiction. This is something that even well-intending people can get wrong, and it's not something you can simply learn how to do properly the way you would other elements in story. It's not as simple as doing adequate research or gaining enough experience. Representation isn't something that everyone can agree on. It's not a matter of sticking to a specific formula. Not that most things in story are so easy, mind you. But there's a weight that needs to be considered that doesn't exist for other aspects of your narrative. What we'll be looking at primarily is diversity in speculative fiction. Genre fiction, fantasy and science fiction especially, tends to be better equipped to handle inclusion and representation in ways that might seem obvious. It's fairly easy to world build brand new cultures and peoples to populate alternate realities or planets. Popular media is full of examples of human-adjacent beings in pseudo-medieval settings going on adventures that captivate audiences of all ages across all cultures. Fantasy is immersive. It's an escape. It's a welcome reprieve from the monotony of our daily lives. That's what all good stories are. But, paradoxically, they must also feel relatable and welcoming, familiar in a way that has to catch and keep a reader's attention quickly. It has to do something new enough that it's interesting while also being understandable. It is in this balance that you can find value. White, cis, heterosexual men can easily find this comfortable place in the fiction they enjoy. Nearly every protagonist fits that basic description, with few exceptions. White men are the de facto heroes of the stories we consume. It shouldn't be the case that any kind of person is represented as the default point of view, narratively. And yet, it's disappointingly still the case today that the majority of speaking roles in movies and television are written for men. Books, too, featured the male perspective more than any other gender. Add race into the mix, and the disparity is even greater. You might be tempted to disregard certain stories or excuse them from their limited representation because of the subject matter, the time period being written about, or the types of characters involved. It's easy to go down that line of thinking, and certainly there's an argument to be made about what constitutes as a necessary in terms of historical accuracy or in keeping with what's known of reality. It's understandable that some stories would feature a more limited cast or would have certain types of people involved. But that's simply not a reasonable position to hold for the majority of speculative fiction. Out of curiosity, I looked up the most popular fantasy video games and tabletop role-playing games of the last couple decades to see what these universes offered in the way of diversity. And of course, there's options to play a variety of fantastical races, with customizable backgrounds and classes. The formula is pretty similar though. I've outlined the basics here. And I've found that, for the most part, there's some sort of combination of human, elf-like race, dwarf-like race, beast-like race, attributed humanoid race. And this is true of most fantasy novels. Lord of the Rings features humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, etc. And this formula has been copy and pasted, tweaked and revamped over and over again for nearly all fantasy stories since. Dungeons & Dragons directly lifts Tolkien's universe. Since its creation, things have consistently been built upon that foundation. New playable races have been added over time. This is one of their selling features. Yet the most played race is human male. Pathfinder is no different. And the same can be said of most major narratives. I used to wonder why it was that fantasy settings never seemed diverse in ways that they should, despite being so much more varied than other stories? Why did it always seem so white, so male? And I think it's because there's only the illusion of uniqueness in these narratives. Yes, there's certainly more than white men in Lord of the Rings, but even the non-human characters are just humans by a different name, or they're slightly tweaked white people. Hobbits are just small white people. Dwarves are just shorter, stockier white people. Elves are just insanely beautiful, pointy-eared white people. Orcs are just... hey, I mean, at least the savage evil race isn't white. Well, I find that a lot of writers mistake uniqueness for diversity. Writers care about having different characters depicted with physical and cultural differences, surely, but they seem not to be concerned with the real people who need to be represented. White male writers are especially bad for centering their narratives around a group of white men or white adjacent men, rather than including women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and other minorities. I just want you to take a look at this for a second. Seriously look at the number of race options for the various fantasy-based games out there. And tell me honestly that there isn't something a little insulting about the fact that creators are going out of their way to brainstorm make-believe races of fantasy people to be companions for mostly white dudes, instead of caring about real diversity, real representation. And before I'm misunderstood, I should point out that I'm a person who plays tabletop role-playing games, and I am in no way implying that it's impossible to tell diverse stories using D&D or Pathfinder or the like. And I'm not saying that writers can't include invented races of people in their fictional worlds. I'm not advising people to stick only to known cultures. I'm not doing any of that. What I am trying to do is point out that women, people of color, people in the LGBTQ+ community, other minorities, they should all see themselves represented. Not as an afterthought or tacked on to fulfill a quota. White writers shouldn't first think of creating new races for their fantasy settings, as if that does the job of actual diversity. Male writers should be mindful that 50% of the world is female, non-binary, gender fluid, not like them. That their perspective isn't the default, and having a variety of voices would only strengthen their narratives. Oh, and while I'm on the topic, men and women can be friends. They don't have to be in romantic relationships. They don't have to get involved. Other kinds of relationships can be explored. Other kinds of sexualities can be displayed. Queer baiting needs to stop as well. Let people be into all kinds of other people without making it into a big deal every single time. Why does every gay character have to struggle with coming out? Can't it be represented as normal sometimes? It seems to be the only kind of story that straight people know how to give people of the LGBTQ+ community, the coming out story. Don't talk to me about realism. If your story has a dragon in it, or dark lords, or whatever, it can have normalized homosexuality in it. If you can write about magic, you can write about women who lead armies and people, and they don't mention anything to do with their gender. The fact that it has to be pointed out that she's strong for a woman, or insert something insulting here about your expectations of a person based on their perceived stereotypical attributes, it's just enough. Just stop. It's not important. Don't do it. Just write people. I don't care if you want to have elves. You can totally put them in your book. You can write about them. That's fine. But make them black once in a while. So, rant over. For now. This topic is honestly too complicated to cover fully in just one video. Frankly, it might not be possible to really explain my thoughts on it fully, completely, even if I were to do several of these. Regardless, this is a thing that consistently bothers me about the media that I see being consumed by people, and even the media that I personally consume. I'll likely elaborate more about this in other videos or reference this issue and how it relates to other topics in future essays. If you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to like and subscribe. For now, I'm gonna go get myself a nice cup of tea. So, like always, let's keep the bag in a little longer for better tea and even better conversations. Thank you, and good night.